I'm Elias, General Legal Counsel at Dyer Lake Funeral Home in North Attleboro. Welcome to this episode of Live and Learn, a series of programs designed to be informative, educational, and upbeat, and always intended to enhance and encourage our personal wellness and awareness. As I was driving to work one day, I came to an intersection. Another car got to the intersection at about the same time, so I gestured to the other driver to go ahead first. Go ahead. Instead of a typical quick wave of the hand, although that seems to be happening less often by the day, they gave me a thumbs up, which I took to mean thank you. And that got me thinking about how we often use our hands to speak, and how we've come to understand certain gestures to mean certain things. Some good, some not so good. Most of us interpret a thumbs up as a positive thing. So let's start with the thumbs up for this program. For many people, the idea that a thumbs up or a thumbs down would save or cost a gladiator's life in ancient Rome, something popularized by Hollywood, it isn't quite right. The fact is, a thumbs up or thumbs down gesture would not have been used to communicate that, in part because although the Romans used a wide visual vocabulary in which the meanings of certain movements were different from their modern implications, the thumbs up wasn't one of them. So unlike in the movie Gladiator, for example, the crowd didn't decide the fate of a sparring gladiator. Instead, it was a referee in the arena who would gesture to communicate a decision about whether the fighter should be spared or put to death. The gesture was more like a thumb pressed into the palm of the hand. Historians suggest that a thumbs up was something of a kill signal, actually, something referred to as a hostile thumb, not an okay or spare a life gesture or thank you. It's not entirely clear when we first began using the thumbs up gesture to mean okay or all is well, but many speculate it was used for a pilot to communicate with the person starting a propeller in early pre-flight checks in the early 1900s. As our usage of a thumbs up as okay has expanded over the years, it's particularly done so with internet giants like YouTube and Facebook, using a small thumbs up for like and a thumbs down for dislike. The two gestures, thousands of years after thumbs were a matter of life and death, or so we thought, may now have acquired a near universal meaning thanks to the internet. You may have often heard the expression as a rule of thumb, meaning an estimation made according to some rough and ready practical rule, not anything that's based on science, precision, or exact measurement. As a rule of thumb, you might say, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to walk a mile. There are a host of theories about the origin of the expression rule of thumb. Most of them make for an interesting read. One of the most common theories is one in which it's said that the expression comes from an old English law which allowed a man to beat his wife with a stick so long as the stick was no thicker than his thumb. In fact, though, that doesn't seem to be the case. There apparently never was such a law. It appears that early British common law once held that it was legal for a man to chastise his wife in moderation, whatever that meant, but there's no evidence to support the theory that you'll often read about of the rule of thumb. The truth is, the expression has been used in countless ways, whether judging the alignment or distance of an object by holding your thumb to your line of vision, or estimating an inch as being from the thumb joint to the nail, or even to being used to measure the temperature of brews of beer. And speaking of thumbs and fingers, how many times have you crossed your fingers hoping for something good to happen? Or maybe it's the times you've crossed your fingers behind your back while telling a little white lie. We cross our fingers or just say the words fingers crossed in hopes of good luck, good fortune. And as children, you may have crossed your fingers behind your back when telling a white lie to an adult, or when making some promise you didn't plan on keeping. Turns out that people have been crossing their fingers for years, centuries in fact. Some historians say the gesture goes back almost 3,000 years. But how is it that we came to start crossing our fingers in the first place? It's been said the gesture has its beginnings in ancient Israel, when courts applying what was called the Law of Moses would end their verdicts by saying, "May God have mercy upon your soul." They said the phrase to affirm God's supreme authority over the law and humanity. A majority of judges felt that although they could sentence someone to death, only God had the authority to judge and pass verdicts on one's soul. Therefore, some judges would cross their fingers when sentencing someone to death as a form of small prayer over their soul. And it's been said that while the gesture may have first come from that scant number of judges in ancient Mosaic courts, it seems its true history didn't begin for almost 1,000 years later, when it became more commonly used by early Christians who suffered religious persecution for their beliefs by the ancient Romans. They would cross their fingers to invoke protection when faced with evil and would use it as a symbol to recognize each other and assemble to celebrate Mass without being detected. The early version of the gesture didn't look the same as it does today. Instead, two people would form an L with their thumb and index finger and touch their thumbs together while crossing their index fingers. If crossing fingers started as a small prayer to God, how did we start to use it when lying? The exact reason is also a debated topic, but it's often said to have started in the early days of the Church, when persecuted Catholics had to lie about their beliefs or else faced death, since Catholicism was outlawed. Because the ninth commandment taught them not to lie, early Christians would make the gesture after lying about their faith as a way to ask for God's forgiveness for their denial. From fingers, thumbs, to hands. Friends do it, strangers do it, and apparently so do chimpanzees. It's not just our deeply embedded in our history and culture that we have begun to use the humble handshake. It may be sort of a part of our DNA, the need for human contact. Although the handshake's origins may date back at least millions of years, it wasn't until 2020, with the COVID pandemic, that unquestionably put the handshake under the microscope, when shaking someone's hand garnered suspicion and criticism as a potential transmitter of the COVID virus. Our hands, it seems, are a veritable petri dish of germs, capable of not only efficiently transferring our warm greetings and good intentions, but bacteria and viruses as well. We've learned that by replacing the handshake with a fist bump, we can reduce transmission of bacteria and germs by up to 90%. And by using an elbow bump, we may actually eliminate entirely the risk of transmission of germs. It's long represented the enduring power of human contact. Whether we're greeting someone for the first time, closing a deal, or making amends, shaking hands has represented a unifying gesture and instantly understandable means of nonverbal communication, recognized as an international sign of goodwill, peace, and respect. It's played a role in everything from first meetings with never-before-contacted tribal nations to political détente. The ancient Egyptians extended the right hand, signifying the phrase to give. It was a symbol of handing over power from a god to a human leader. It's often said to have been a way of conveying peaceful intentions. When hands were clasped, people showed that their word was a sacred bond. By extending their empty right hands, strangers could show that they weren't holding any weapons and that they bore no ill will towards one another. It's been said that an agreement, whether spoken or in writing, can be expressed quickly and clearly in words, but can be only made effective upon a ritual gesture like a handshake. Open, weaponless hands stretched out toward one another, mutually grasping each other in a display of sincerity and goodwill. By the way, the gesture of shaking the hand evolved from a hand grasp to a handshake. In case those good intentions weren't quite so honest, it's often reported that the act of shaking someone's hand, not merely grasping it, was intended to dislodge any knives or daggers, swords that might inadvertently be hidden up a sleeve. And speaking of how our hands can often communicate our intentions, as you undoubtedly know, sign language is the primary means of communication for those with hearing or speech impairments. It's estimated that more than 70 million people around the world use sign languages to communicate. But what many of us may not realize is that there's no one universal sign language. In fact, it's said there are somewhere between 150 and 300 or so different sign languages used around the world, with some of the most frequently used sign languages including American Sign Language, ASL, French Sign Language, Libras, or Brazilian Sign Language, each with their own unique signs. And if you've ever watched a sign language interpreter standing alongside a government official at a press conference, you've undoubtedly noticed how animated they can be. The reason is that although facial expression in the hearing world at times may be seen as rude or inappropriate, most of the side language grammar, such as punctuation, intonation, tenses, transitions, run-on sentences, occur with tilting of the face and head and shoulder shifting when using sign language. It can show dialogue. It seems that facial expressions are an essential part of American Sign Language communication. They enhance the meaning of specific signs. They increase the emotion expressed. And they are part of what's known as non-manual markers that influence the sign's meaning. It can turn the word happy to very happy, and understand could mean, oh, I get it, or I'm starting to understand, through facial expression. They could be the same sign, but the facial expression is completely different, imparting a different meaning on the same words. And here's one. In the 1970s, a chimpanzee named Nim Chimpsky took part in a Columbia University research study called Project NIM, which was led by a psychologist at Columbia who sought to determine if a chimpanzee could learn to communicate using American Sign Language. His name, Nim Chimpsky, was a twist on the name Noam Chomsky. Chomsky was a professor of linguistics at MIT who theorized that language as we know it is unique to humans and humans alone. The goal of the project at Columbia was to see if the animal, Nim, could be conditioned to communicate with humans if he was raised like a human child in a human household. And so to immerse Nim in a world where he would be taught sign language in the same way as a human child, he was brought to live with a family at their home in Manhattan not long after he was born in 1973. Nim joined the family, living among his humans who taught him sign language. And in fact, Nim came to learn about 125 signs. But the question remained, was he really learning language? Or as the research concluded ultimately, was he simply tracking his teacher's signs and imitating them, but not making signs spontaneously? And in the end, the researchers came to believe that Noam Chomsky was right. Nim Chimpsky would never use language the way humans do, that is, to form sentences and express ideas. The project ended in 1977, and Nim lived out the rest of his days at an animal sanctuary in Texas. By the way, he was something of a celebrity during his lifetime, featured on Sesame Street, The Johnny Carson Tonight Show, and other television shows. Changing gears a bit and taking a look at not thumbs up, thumbs down, or our hands, let's take a look at some highs and lows. Let's start with some highs. Mountain highs, to be exact. If I asked you to name the tallest mountain on the planet, you'd probably say it's Mount Everest, a huge pyramid-shaped peak in the Himalayan mountains, straddling Nepal and Tibet. You'd be right, provided you qualified your answer by saying it was the tallest mountain above sea level. Scientists debate exactly how tall Mount Everest is because it's apparently grown by about 2 inches since 1954. It stands at approximately 29,031 feet due to the fact the relatively young mountains are still on the rise as the result of ongoing collisions between what are known as the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates, which form the mountain range. For the record, the highest mountain that's measured by a mountain's height above sea level is Mount Denali in Alaska, rising about 18,000 feet from its base, a greater vertical rise than Everest from its base at 17,000 feet. All right, and to confuse matters just a bit more, Mauna Kea in Hawaii would be the tallest mountain anywhere in the world at more than 33,000 feet above the sea floor. If you're keeping track of all of this, Mount Whitney in Sequoia National Park is the tallest mountain in the lower 48 United States. Okay, just a couple more. The Colorado Rocky Mountains. They're part of the 1,900-mile Rocky Mountain chain that stretches from British Columbia all the way to New Mexico. Their highest peak at 14,000 plus feet is on Mount Elbert. By the way, did you know that Colorado has not one but 2 state songs, one reflecting its Rocky Mountain? And many of us of a certain generation have come to know that song, Rocky Mountain High, which turns out to be one of the 2 official state songs of Colorado. It was written by Henry John Deutschendorf, Jr., better known as John Denver. And the song was apparently highly controversial when it was first released in 1972. In fact, the song Rocky Mountain High was banned by most radio stations, and its lyrics became the subject of considerable debate, since it was widely believed the song included the word high, referencing drug use. As a matter of fact, John Denver was asked to testify before Congress in 1985, when Congress was exploring the possibility of requiring a mandatory rating system in the recording industry, labeling records where excesses of explicit sex or graphic violence occurred and where there were references in lyrics to drugs, alcohol, or the occult. As Denver testified, the notion that his song was about drug and drug usage, in his words, was clearly a case of misinterpretation. Rocky Mountain High was the feeling he experienced from the natural beauty and the majesty of the land. And for the record, John Denver gained national recognition for the first time when his song Leaving on a Jet Plane was recorded by Peter, Paul, and Mary, becoming their first and only #1 hit. Closer to home, on the subject of mountain highs, the highest mountain in Massachusetts, that would be Mount Greylock. It's on the Appalachian National Scenic Trail in the Berkshires. It has the highest natural peak in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts at just shy of 3,500 feet. And in neighboring Little Rhodey, Rhode Island, well, there's not even a mountain. The highest point in the state is Jeremoth Hill in Foster, Rhode Island, standing at a whopping 812 feet tall. To put that one in perspective, the Empire State Building is about 1,250 feet tall, with over 100 floors, and it was for many years the tallest man-made building in the world. But even that is dwarfed by the Burj Khalifa, located in the main business district in downtown Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. It is the tallest building in the world. It reaches a breathtaking 2,716 feet into the sky. It's been called a vertical city. And according to Guinness World Records, it has the tallest elevator in a building anywhere in the world, with the most floors in a building at 163 floors. And of course, it hosts the highest restaurant from ground level, located at just shy of 1,500 feet above ground. As for its name, Burj means tower, and Khalifa honors the leader of a neighboring emirate. From the highest highs to the lowest lows, the Mariana Trench is a gorge or chasm located in the western Pacific Ocean. It spans a length of just about 1,600 miles, and it's home to the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on the Earth's surface, plunging about 7 miles underwater. That's nearly 3 times deeper than the site where the wreckage of the Titanic lies in the Atlantic Ocean. And during the first expedition to the Challenger Deep in 1960, researchers were astonished to see living creatures where they once imagined it would be impossible for anything to survive because of the darkness, the depth, and the cold. And that changed all preconceptions about ocean life after that time when they learned otherwise. So fast forward to 2019, when a Texas investor and explorer by the name of Victor Vescovo, he established the world record for having covered the most vertical distance on Earth. It seems that in 2010, he climbed to the summit of Mount Everest, and in 2019, Vescovo reached the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench in a deep-sea submersible. At that time, he offered a depressing glimpse into the state of the Earth's environment when he observed man-made trash, a plastic bag, candy wrappers at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Up, down, high, low, left, right. It's estimated that between 85 and 90% of the world's population are right-handed, meaning that roughly 10 to 15% of the population are lefties. For centuries, it was thought that right-handed people were so much more predominant than those who favored their left hand that lefties must obviously be a little bit more suspect. Actually, quite a bit more suspect. So much so that being a lefty was long linked with witchcraft and the occult and associated as a mark of the devil. Superstitions have always followed the direction of left, such as the left side of the bed being considered the wrong side to get out of, or passing a drink with your left hand being bad luck. Even the Latin word sinistra roughly translates to sinister and originally meant left. On the other hand, so to speak, there have been some well-regarded lefties. Babe Ruth, the Sultan of Swat, Presidents Barack Obama, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Harry Truman, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, to name some, and other well-known people like Bill Gates, Henry Ford, John D. Rockefeller, Whoopi Goldberg, Julia Roberts, and Brad Pitt, all lefties. But then there was Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most brilliant men in history. He took his left-handedness to an extreme. He wrote from right to left. Historians have plenty of creative theories to explain what's been referred to as Da Vinci's mirror writing, named because one would have to hold up his writing to a mirror to read it. It's been suggested, but never proven, that Da Vinci may have been trying to make it difficult for people to decipher his notes. The other possible reason for his mirror writing was a little bit less clandestine. As any lefty will tell you, writing in ink from left to right creates a messy smear. It's said that left-handedness tends to run in families, but noticeably less so than other inherited traits like height or intelligence. Identical twins who share the same genes can sometimes have different dominant hands. And whether it's Lou Gehrig in baseball, Wayne Gretzky in ice hockey, Martina Navratilova in tennis, or Oscar de la Hoya in boxing, some of the best athletes in history have been lefties. Studies have shown that in comparison to the 10% or so of the people who are left-handed in the general population, lefties actually make up almost a third of Major League Baseball players. It's said that left-handed athletes may have an advantage in those sports that involved aiming something toward an opponent, whether it's a baseball or a tennis ball or a contact sport like boxing. It seems that right-handed players have less familiarity competing against left-handed players because of the smaller percentage of lefties. And that puts the lefties at an advantage. Monica Seles, a former world #1 ranked tennis player, is quoted as saying, "It's strange to play a lefty because everything is opposite, and it takes a while to get used to the switch. By the time I feel comfortable," she said, "the match is usually over and not in her favor." One more lefty, William, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. It's been said that it works out very nicely for the British royal family that he's a lefty, since he and Princess Kate can both wave to well-wishers with their dominant hands and without bumping into one another. I'm Jay Elias. Thank you for watching this episode of Live and Learn. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to your joining me again for another program designed to enhance and encourage your personal wellness and awareness. Until then, remember, it's never too late to learn. And in closing, I'd like to leave you with the words of Benjamin Franklin. The handshake of the host affects the taste of the roast. It's thought to mean that how we greet and welcome people has a lasting impression on their experience with us, encapsulating our future interactions and even the food we may serve to them as our guests.